This week's rant is on scaling the change that we kickstarted a couple of videos ago and accelerated last video. So scaling has two phases. It's a push phase and a pull phase. And the push phase is really more of the accelerating, where you're pushing this behavior into the core business. And then the pull phase is the core business starts to see the value of that behavior and says, hey, I want some of that here. Check out this week's rant. Let me know what you think. Thumbs up, comments, share. See ya. Hi, Brant Cooper here. I'm fortunate I get to travel around the world speaking with startup founders, investors, ecosystem developers. I've learned a lot in my travels. I've got some stories, and I have some thinking that I love to share. Welcome to Brant's Rant. So another part then of this scaling phase is looking at any of those kickstart/accelerate programs that have now gotten bigger, that business units are actually wanting them, right? So there's this sort of these two phases of scaling. The first is push, which is a continuation of the acceleration, and we're maybe choosing those areas that I mentioned in the road mapping part, where you're choosing parts of the organization and that you're putting these structures in place, you're putting this behavior in place. And then there's the second phase, which is this pull. And it's because of these different ways that you've implemented the programs, business units are participating at some level in these programs, and they see the benefits of this exploration behavior. They realize that it's not, this completely other world, and they start saying, like, yeah, we need that in here. And it becomes rather obvious, and this has happened in multiple organizations we've worked with, where the business units are starting, they start pulling it in, and that's sort of the second phase of scale. First phase is push, second phase is pull. It's not that dissimilar to, if you think about the life cycle adoption curve, this tipping point that you hopefully achieve in the early majority, which is a startup pushing product out and then the market pulling the product. And that tipping point is called product market fit, even though that's another term that has been completely bastardized by certain parties in the startup world. Product market fit isn't the theory. Product market fit is what is happening. But so anyways, you're looking at these programs, these internal startups or internal initiatives that began maybe in Kickstarter, they accelerated. They actually could be also from acquisitions. And so they would be what we would call Horizon 2 businesses or Horizon 2 initiatives. Horizon 2 is not really about the type of innovation it is, it's where it is in the scaling factor. And so as Horizon 1 is, it's now part of the core business. Horizon 3 is, it's a ways away because there's not a ton of evidence, there's not a ton of traffic. Horizon 2 is this scaling phase, really, where there's some evidence that there's something there, and then at the end of Horizon 2 is there's so much traction there that maybe we should pull this into the core business. And so in the scale phase, in my model, in the case, the business unit wants this internal initiative, but it's not yet at the scaled phase, which happens at the end of the scale phase, right? And so if the core business just takes it in, they'll kill it because it's still not generating revenue that is equivalent to the core business revenue, but it's sure showing all the signs that it's going to get there. And so to me, what's needed there is what I call a docking station. So the docking station is, sort of attached to the business unit, and it's owned and funded by the business unit, but it still is a separate entity, and they practice this balance of execution and explore differently than the core business. So the core business is mostly execute and a little bit of explore. The docking station is, sort of whatever balance is needed in order to generate more growth and more revenue. And so again, it's hopefully up and to the right, and eventually it gets to the point where the core business then just takes it in. But so this docking unit is super important because you've got more of this exploration behavior that's right there, right next to the core business. This docking station, you've got leaders that are acting as mentors and advisors. In addition to their managed execution responsibilities, the internal initiatives or startups are receiving funding, but more funding than in the past, based upon achieving milestones. So there's still this investment board or growth board that's overseeing that. There's a lot of people that believe, for whatever reason, that existing leaders can't do both of those behaviors. And again, I think that's just absolutely absurd and really rather dismissive and maybe even insulting. There's a lot of people in the startup world that come from the big business world and know how to invest there. And they certainly could be taught, most of them, some of them, can be taught the skills on how to be an advisor and how how to sort of put on this exploration hat instead of just the execution hat. And this idea that they can't, I think, is just absolutely absurd, and that there's no evidence of it. They're often not incentivized to do both, but that's actually different. In this scaled phase, why not give them some incentives? Maybe the incentives are sort of, well, you're not going to get your bonus if you don't invest in there, or maybe they get some sort of a bonus if those incubated docking station initiative reach scale. So there's all sorts of ways to incentivize the behavior that you want to see among those leaders. But the key is really having that exploration mode close. And it's key for both the core business so that they can learn that and see that it worked and understand it and maybe even start applying it on their own. But also that internal initiative needs to leverage the assets of the core business. That's actually how they get to scale. They don't need to reinvent everything. Yeah, and so that's, maybe there's instances where you want to have completely spun out that startup, but that's a strategic decision. That's fine, but it's not a requirement to do so. It's not necessarily so. And so that's the scaffolding component, and it serves to protect, I guess it could protect the core business from the internal initiative for a little bit, but you actually want that to start breaking down. And so, there's this idea of scaffolding that, the different types of scaffolding. One is that it actually it sort of disappears like internal sutures. And then there's other parts of scaffolding that are sort of dismantled. And this idea of scaffolding is one that, it sort of never goes away, but it's like when we need to improve something or reinvent something, we can create this scaffolding that protects it while it's going through those changes. The last part I wanted to talk about is this idea of communications flow. I find it sort of fascinating. If you successfully implement this agile structure, then suddenly you have all of these teams. They're assigned missions. So there's this communication flow that goes down, which is leadership establishing, what are the strategic priorities? What is the vision of the company? And what is the overall mission of the business over a time period? And then all of the different business units or divisions or departments or however your company is structured have their own missions, and that's in service to the company missions. And at some point you get down to this layer where you've got management that is assembling a group of different agile teams, each of them with their own mission, but that rolls up to whatever that division or group mission is. Well, so you end up needing this team of teams, which again is the General McChrystal term. And the team of teams is taking a representative from each of the agile teams, and that representative could be hierarchy based or it could be rotational. Again, I think that really depends more on the business and the culture and these other things. But that team of teams' job is to take all of the work that's been done on their own individual teams and they're assembling it, right? They're integrating it, they're aggregating it. And the leadership of that team of teams then needs to align the work that the team of teams are doing with the group mission. And what you have here is a layer where the context is different for that layer than it is at the lowest layer. And so the middle management role is to ensure that the work that's being done at the lowest level is relevant to this higher context. And the representatives from the teams help in that process. And that's why it's this team of teams that is understanding the larger picture. They do gaps analysis. They do change, they help change the structure or the missions even in order to ensure that the team of teams aggregation is serving its group's mission. And so you could have multiple layers of these team of teams all the way up to the company priorities and the company mission. So you have the top-down communications flow of what the priorities and the missions are and the changes that are occurring based upon whatever, right? Based upon global pandemic, based upon a storm wiping out manufacturing, based upon a ship being stuck in a canal that disrupts supply chain. So there's all sorts of, again, this increased awareness that maybe then flows down and changes the work all the way maybe down at the ground layer, but also, in the middle layers. And so then there's a communication flow back up because the bottom layer is doing the work. They're self-organized and autonomous. And so there's learnings that they have and insights and experiments and customer interactions and what's working and what's not working. And all of that needs to flow back up. And there's the progress metrics. There's the learning metric. And so there's these mechanisms that have to be put in place that allow this communication to flow back up. And you've got, again, these layers of middle management that have to integrate that data and suggest changes and recommendations up. And so middle management always wants to be more strategic. And so this agile is a new layer of work. Plus, this communications flow allows middle management suddenly to be more strategic. And so we've sort of missed that component, I think. And it's super fascinating because the middle management has sort of been left out. They haven't had these new skills developed. We've got leaders with new skill development. We've got these teams that are learning how to be agile and design thinking and lean startup and all these great frameworks. And the middle management is stuck there. And yet, middle management starts taking the roles of their leaders in the same way that the agile teams have taken the roles of the lower layers of middle management. And it's super fascinating because each time that you roll that up, then it frees the next layer up of management of being more proactive and less reactive. It also means, however, that you need less of the middle management, which is not a small deal in terms of the ultimate structure of the highly functional rad organization. And I think it's one of those difficult things to manage in terms of people. I don't really like change that requires laying people off, but you got a lot of skill sets in there where those people actually that's not the type of work that they want to do, or they don't have the ability to do it. And it's one of those things that is just, I think, an inevitable course that's going to take. But anyway, I think that the other part of this is not just this up and this down, it's a cross. It's this horizontal communication that has to happen. And it's one of the things that I think companies are really stuck with, and it's totally a part of this digital revolution. So when things were top down, because the decision and the information flow came from the apex, from the top, all of the parts of the organization were sort of getting the same information. But if you think about it from the ground up, the information is coming in through all of these nodes of this meshed network. There's no guarantee that these different areas of the company are receiving the information that they need. You know, and in some of these companies that we've worked with, they'll have half a dozen different versions of SharePoint or SharePoint type of applications. And it's really because, you know, the left hand really doesn't know what the right hand is doing. It's really more that the index finger doesn't know what the ring finger is doing. The fingers don't know what the toes are doing. I mean, it's really pretty insane because we've got all of this communications flow, and yet we don't have this purposeful implementation of how we're going to manage that flow. And so I think that that's this final stage. And so it's implementing these different means of communications flow. And I think that, you know, Slack and Microsoft Teams, it's by no accident that these things are becoming more popular because that's one of the solutions. In my view, Techstar style email is another part of the solution. And then there's these other, you know, maybe listen in only calls at a departmental or a company level. And then there's sort of these show and tells, these sort of larger retrospectives and demo days that where, again, this information is being shared across. There's ways of implementing sharing insights and sharing experiment results that other parts of the organization need. And I think that that's the final part of making scale work, is this communications flow. Super interesting, and a lot of stuff still to be figured out. But I think that if the organization can make this transition from the push mode to the pull mode, I think a lot of this other stuff starts happening because the organizations are filled with such smart people smarter than me that know how to do all of this stuff, and they suddenly become empowered to actually make these changes. And it's not top-down fiefdom, it's grassroots. It's being able to take in the information in the moment and having these team structures that solve these problems. And I think what you'll find is that the momentum changes, that it's no longer pushing these changes, that now it's pull, and these organizations will be to the races. So thanks for listening, and yeah, I'd appreciate a like, comment, share, and we'll see you next time. Hey, Brant Cooper here, New York Times bestselling author of The Lean Entrepreneur. My next book, Disruption Proof, where I fix capitalism from my hammock. I've got the pre-order bundles. They're dropped. They're on brantcooper.com. Go check it out. You can pre-order the book now, and I've got all sorts of other goodies thrown in there, including talks. If you want to form a book club or you've got some people in your organization that you think could benefit from some of the principles and philosophies I talk about in the book, check it out, brantcooper.com. See you soon. Hey, thanks for listening to Brant's Rant. If we're choosing capitalism here as a society, then let's make it work for a better world. If you'd like to join me as we redefine capitalism for the 21st century, go to beatcoop.co/D4A. Also, if you have a pressing issue that you're facing in your innovation group, your product group, your startup, and want to join me on video, see the link below. Subscribe, like, see you next time.